graveyard shift, at least it's not straight after lunch, and I just said to Annabelle, I'm too short to stand anywhere near this. The last conference I did, they literally gave me a box to stand on so I could see over the podium. So yeah, I think just a little bit of background, thought it would be quite nice. Dr. Botha was actually my economics lecturer, so it took me back a very long way, listening to him stand up here and talk. And I actually used to go, because he was such a good speaker, I used to go to his economics lectures during the day in Afrikaans and at night in English, just because he was so passionate about what he spoke about. So yeah, I think it was a really nice opportunity to hear him speak, and I think really a positive spin on things, which is so different from so much of what we hear. And I think, Annabelle, what she's just spoken about as well is that positive spin. We do need reality, which is what Yaku's brought. But I'm going to try and keep mine from being, because legislation, you read on the agenda for today, legislation, and everybody goes, oh God, here we go again. So I'm going to try and keep it fairly light-hearted, fairly sort of at a reasonably high level, and just share some thoughts and some insights from what we've gathered over the last sort of 2-3 years working in this space, specifically with the extended producer responsibility legislation that has come into play. So, Annabelle, I think you've got the clicker, or somebody. Where's the clicker? Oh, no, you don't. Sorry, I lie. Thank you. Okay. So I think, does anybody know what this thing EPR, sometimes I hear often people call it ERP, that's a different thing. SAP is an ERP. Do you guys know what EPR is and what the point of it is? It's basically, it is a term and a concept that has actually been around for a very long time. It's been around, it's sort of driven, a lot of it comes out of your developed countries, but it really is about saying, when you make something, you need to think about the long-term consequences of what you've developed and take actual responsibility for it. So it's no longer saying, I've produced this thing, now it's your problem because you've gone and, it's in your hands. I wash my hands of all responsibility. The whole idea is very focused on, typically, on the waste side of things. So you'll see the legislation that came out isn't just about packaging. It's about lighting, it's about electronics. So it's all these things that are causing waste problems in our country. And it's about saying, hang on guys, we can't just rely on the end consumer who sticks it in a river or dumps it illegally or does whatever to make sure that this thing lands up in the right place. It's actually the people who put these things on the market that need to take responsibility and actually think about the life cycle of their products when they're making those decisions. So in terms of, I don't know how many of you have actually read the legislation, hands up. Well, that's yellow. Thank you. One over there. Do you know that all brand owners, producers, are responsible by the 5th of November to submit an EPR plan, or sign up to an EPR plan for their packaging? Sorry?
14 days. 2 weeks.
14 days. There are penalties of things like going to jail. Okay? So it's a big thing, it's an important thing. But in the regulations, there's a thing called producer. And we've been going backwards and forwards with government about who is this producer? Who is this who you speak of? And we've tried to, in our thinking, whenever we're thinking about this legislation, it's not clear. But take it back to, where does it come from? Well, it's the people who are making the ultimate decisions that influence what happens when the stuff lands on the market. So it's the resin producers, so it'll be Sasol, it'll be Safripol, thinking about those resins. It's the converters, and I got into trouble the other day for calling them converters. I think Jeremy jumped on me. He says, packaging manufacturers, please. So converters, packaging manufacturers, impact, the guys who actually make the stuff and think about the design of them. And what I love, what I really love about the containers business with an impact is the thinking of it, is it's not just about you thinking about its application and its post-life, because it's something that can be reused. There's a lot of your packaging that gets, your materials that get reused. But then it's also, very importantly, your packaging decision makers. It's the guys sitting in, somebody mentioned ZZ2 earlier. How does ZZ2 decide what to package their packaging? It's not the packaging converters, the packaging manufacturers. It might influence it, but ultimately ZZ2 as a brand, Clover as a brand, retailers with their own house brands, they make the decisions on what their products go into from a packaging perspective. They're the decision makers. Also, under the legislation, anybody who's importing any packaged product is accountable and responsible for the packaging of that product. So if you're bringing in... Sorry? Well, I'm thinking of something that's actually packaged already. So, car bumpers. You're responsible for the packaging that the car bumpers are in because you're importing that. You've got to be you have to make sure that you have signed up to a plan, or you're involved in a plan that deals with that. So it's a really big thing, and the whole reason why government has done this is because they need the value chain from the people who make the decisions all the way down to the people who actually put the resins onto the market and the raw materials. So packaging, remember, this legislation doesn't only talk to plastic packaging, it talks to paper, it talks to metal, it talks to all of those different things out there. So every type of packaging that gets put on the market needs to have an EPR plan behind it, and all of these players need to be part of that EPR plan because they influence and impact what goes on and what happens. They don't necessarily influence what happens post-use now, but the idea is, under EPR, extended producer responsibility, you start taking responsibility for it at the end of its life. So, I've taken a little extract here from the regulations, just in terms of what is the purpose of this thing. And I want to point to point 3 in particular, because it says here, the purpose of the regulations is to blah, 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 to encourage and enable the implementation of circular economy initiatives. So this isn't only about resolving waste. It's not only, yes it is, and it is about getting more efficient and more effective, but it's also about changing the way we do things from a take, make, dispose to a take, make, reuse, repurpose, recycle model. And closing that loop so we stop drawing down on all of those resources that we just, as Yaki presented, we just keep pulling out, starting to close that loop. And I think it's a really important distinction, actually, and something when we've been putting together these EPR plans is there's almost 2 challenges. There's one is dealing with the waste mess that Anabi showed us, that's taking waste out of the environment, and there's dealing with circular economy challenges. And sometimes they don't necessarily talk to each other, and I'll talk to you just now about some of the solutions from a recycling point of view. Many of the options from a recycling point of view are not necessarily circular. They might absorb waste, and we need to be considering those. We can't throw those out just because we're hanging our hat 100% on circular economy. But at the same time, we need to be directing our thinking towards building more circular systems. And that's what the legislation is about. So it's a very long piece of legislation. I think November last year, the sort of final gazetted regulations came out, and then subsequently there have been changes and amendments and clarifications. It's still as clear as mud, and then a bit clearer than that, or less clear than that. But there's some key things that go into that you need to be thinking about. The first one here, and I'll point is my little targets. They're very, very defined targets in the legislation, at the back of the regulations, that say, for each packaging type, from year 1, which starts January 1st, 2022, there are targets for collection, recycling, I think biodegradable compostable components, and a use of recycled content. So you've got PET, rigid PET beverage bottles, rigid PET oil bottles. The story goes on. You've got polyolefins. There's also things called single-use items, which are very confusing because lots of the things that fit under the other categories are also single-use, but that's the mud that we're dealing with. But there are targets, and they're very clear targets, and they're very ambitious targets. For some of those, they're a bit easier, and some of them, they're going to be very challenging. we're working with Impact at the moment, and a couple of the other converters that make thermoform products. You guys know the sort of clamshell stuff? At the moment, that stuff's not recycled. If it happens to land up at a thermoform recycler, well, maybe they'll and might blend it in, but it's not, there's not a driven focus on getting that. But actually there's targets for year one to start collecting, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, I'm looking at you, I think it's about 10%. Now 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but those things are very lightweight. They go everywhere. They are almost always contaminated with food. They're not an easy thing to collect. So how on earth are we going to get those things out of the system and processed within the next year? Big challenge. So there's some really big targets out there that are sitting in the legislation, and we're going to have to convince governments, if we don't meet those targets, why we didn't meet them and how we're going to meet them the next time, and hope to hang that they don't throw the book at us. The next thing that talks about is the money side of things, and this is, at the end of the day, what this turns into is there are fees that need to be paid to deliver this EPR scheme, and players across the value chain are going to have to contribute. At the end of the day, who's going to pay? Consumers. So best we make this thing work, because you, me, all of us, we're going to be paying. And that money needs to go into building infrastructure, processing infrastructure, recycling infrastructure, collection infrastructure, communication and education around separation of source. There's so much that needs to be done with that money. It also stipulates quite a lot around integration, your point earlier, about integrating informal collectors into the system. And we have to think about how we do that in a dignified way. And again, the work that we do, we've engaged a lot with the informal collection sector. There's some that don't want to be formalized. They're very happy to be informal. There's others who want to be more formalized. But what the legislation says, and it came out in the latest revision, was there will be a service fee payable to those pickers for the service that they offer. It doesn't say how much or where, but they have to be paid. At the moment, it's just a collection. They're paid to collect on the basis of what the value of the product that they collect. So there's a lot of work to be done in that space, and not an easy thing to deal with. It also talks about, and I'm very glad that there are some people from government, because it talks about we have to partner with government, we have to partner with municipalities. It does give us 3 years to do that, and there are a couple of municipalities who are further ahead than others, and where there's some, Econometrics, I know there's some work going on, there's some work in Buffalo City, Cape Town, Stellenbosch. There's pockets of it, but it's not nationwide yet. But it stipulates we have to partner, and how are you going to do that? The plan that needs to be submitted on the 5th of November has to talk about how you're going to start doing this. And then lastly, which I think is very onerous, and this is where I think everybody's going to tie themselves in knots at the rate we're going, is the reporting side of things. Annaby, every year, she shared some of her stats now, does a fantastic recycling study. But what needs to be done now is literally reporting what enters the market. So every ton of plastic that enters the South African market, either produced locally or imported. So think about when you bought a packet of biscuits, of Danish cookies from Denmark. The guy who's importing that is theoretically supposed to be reporting on the packaging that they put that Danish cookie in. And that volume needs to be reported. Then you need to be reporting on how much you're meeting those targets in terms of collection, recycling. So I hope I'm scaring you. Am I? Are you going to go and get involved in this thing now? Because it's big, it's scary. I'm going to jump on Yaku's thing. It's too late, guys. We keep a lot. But we still need to get on board with this. And there's a lot of thinking that needs to go on board if we come into this. As per the legislation, you can either manage a scheme by yourself. If you say, okay, well, I have a packaging business, I procure packaging, I'm going to manage it myself, you can do that. You can set up an independent scheme with 2 or 3 other people, or you can contract a PRO, a producer responsibility organization. So your Petcos, your Polycos, Medpacks, those guys, and they can manage it on your behalf. What it doesn't mean, though, if you get a PRO and you say, okay, and this is what I'm loving seeing, I've signed up to Polyco, I'm okay, cheers. No, sorry, that's not how it works. Polyco is there to deliver on a mandate that you've given them, but as an organization, you are ultimately liable for that. It is not the producer responsibility organization. Because you have contracted out, it's like saying, oh, well, here you've got a client and you subcontract a piece of your work to a client, to somebody else to deliver it. If that person messes up, your client's going to come to you, not to the subcontractor. So just keep that in mind. You've got to be involved and engaged in these conversations. So I think, and I've already led to quite a lot of, sort of alluded to a lot of the challenges and the risks that I see in terms of how industries responded to this legislation. Now going back 3-4 years now at least, this story actually started, I'm sure many of you remember the IWMPs, the Integrated Waste Management Plans, where government said, first piece of legislation, government said, we will manage this, tell us how you're going to do it and what you're going to pay us to basically manage it. And industry went, whoa, no, we will manage it, actually submitted plans, and government listened. There was a change of minister and a few other things happened. Government listened and said, okay, fine, industry, you want to manage it, go and manage it, go and manage it. Here are the regulations. But unfortunately, I think we haven't done such a great job in doing this responsibly. We're setting up multiple PROs everywhere. There's still PROs dealing with multiple people dealing with different things. There's independent schemes going up left, right, and centre. There's a lot of people who are either fence sitting, and I'm talking here predominantly brand owners, the guys who actually make the decisions about what they're going to package their products in, not involved in these discussions at all. Not part of that at all. What's going to happen? You're liable. Whoops. Not engaged in the discussion. So, of course, the PROs are doing their best to do what they can, but they're kind of making stuff up as they go along because they have to. Because today, let's say, and I'm just going to take a random example. Today, I am Polyco. I have Nestle signed up as my brand owner, my one and only brand owner on flexible packaging, BOPP. Somebody mentioned BOPP. Just making it up. But tomorrow, I've got 10 companies that come to me and say, I want you to manage my waste under the EPR plan. Polyco's gone from managing this many tons to that many tons overnight and has to do a plan dealing with hundreds of thousands of tons instead of a couple of thousand tons. Very different conversation. And I put this one in green, the sort of the umbrella PRO body. There has been a move to set some sort of an organization up that can address the broader issues that relate to all PROs, communication, integration of the informal sector, a couple of those things. So there's some stuff that's been happening there. But overall, I think the risk is in the red, guys. If we don't get this right, and I don't want to be standing up here in 3 years' time going, I told you so, because government says, I gave it to you, you stuffed it up, now give it back, and I'm just going to charge you a tax. Because you know where these taxes go. Plastic bag levy, where did that go? Government doesn't ring fence. Government's trying to fill its fiscus. So it's not going to, it's looking. It's sitting waiting. The government doesn't necessarily answer the questions we ask them when we put in these plans together because legislation is ambiguous. You ask them a question, is this in, is this out? Silence, 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 and then you get a blanket answer. So it's not an easy space, and if people don't get involved and engaged, it's going to get only more messy. And the only people that are going to lose at the end of the day are all of us as consumers, and it's not going to fix the environmental problem, because once that money goes into the fiscus, it's not going to go to environmental solutions. It's not going to build the waste management sector. It's not going to do any of that. It's going to go, and I can't even remember what Dr. Botha said. He rattled off his sort of 5 corrupts, blah, 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 that. We don't want it to go there. Let's keep it in-house. And I think the big thing to remember with all of this, it's not a competitive space. This is about cleaning up, doing the right thing for your industry, making sure that we actually do what needs to be done. And it's not just a compliance space. It's not a tick the box, oh, I've paid my fees and now. It's not going to work either. We really should be doing it for the right reasons. But it's also going, and I think that's my next slide, is there's actually a lot of opportunity, and this is where I'm going to learn from my lecturer. There's some real opportunities sitting in that EPR legislation if we do take it seriously and we do deliver on what it's actually asking us to do. It can grow the green economy, it can create jobs. We have to, by definition, when we start getting all this stuff back, you start collecting all this waste. We're going to have to do something with it. South Africans, what do? A boer market plan. We come up with solutions. So let's do that. Let's create those jobs. Let's get that economy growing. But also, really importantly for the plastics industry, it's really important for your reputation. Talked about reputational damage. Do it authentically, and we can start going from foe to friend. Maybe not friend. I think it's hard to convince those diehards that you're a friend, but at least be seen, and it's not just be seen to be doing it. Do it. Do it properly, and then your reputation stands to grow. So I think just getting onto the next piece of my my talk, which is a little bit around sort of recycling and what happens to this stuff when, Annalie presented this big picture of all the mess. Well, if we were to clean that up, and there was some, I was checking out, early in my career, I worked for Telecom Namibia, and my job was to work on phone booths. Remember those good old phone booths, coin operated and card operated? I used to go around and count phone boxes. Everywhere I went to see if there was a phone box, just because I was working in that space. Now I look at litter and I go, margarine type, ice cream type, thermoform. Luckily my husband's my business partner, so we're equally crazy when we're in our kitchen and house. But I think in the space of looking at what to do with all this stuff when we get it, we need to be thinking about this waste hierarchy. A lot of people say, just burn it. There's a lot of value sitting in that, in the stuff. It's energy, it's ready to go. Unlock it, burn it. Well, preferably not. That's kind of at the very last end of the, you don't want to be doing that until you've got the best value out of it you possibly can. The first thing is to start about prevention, and I liked your extra R's. I actually wrote it, no, I didn't write it on this piece of paper, but what was it, repair, refuse, and those ones. All sit up in that prevent space. And Annalie's single banana, prevent the waste in the first place, don't take it out the system. Design for sustainability. Think about the long haul, so that's where impact containers is a great one. The lugs that have been developed, all of those kinds of things are thinking about something that has longevity. It's an asset. If we think about waste, if we think about packaging as an asset, not just a thing we have to deal with, changes our perspective quite a lot. Obviously reducing, I know we've spoken about that, I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's something that some of you may know Sally Ann Kastner from, she does a lot of work in this space, and she coined the term that I've hooked onto called next life solutions. Not end of life. It might be the end of life of the milk bottle as a milk bottle, but it has another life. What are you going to do with it? And that's where the recycling and the reuse, how do you start using it again and again? And then only start looking at those end of life options. There will come a point where you cannot do anything with it anymore. Then we want to look at, okay, well, can we extract energy from it? The last thing you want to be doing is landfilling it. The last thing you want to be doing is littering it. That's the worst. But I think when we look at all of these solutions, and you as businesses should be considering your packaging footprint. Your packaging footprint starts as stuff comes in the door of your production facilities, all the way into the hands of your end customer. That entire chain. Think about all your packaging. I'm not going to talk about this too much, the Plastics Pact, but just to highlight the South African Plastics Pact is founded on the basis of the Ellen MacArthur's circular economy principles. A lot of the biggest brand owners in South Africa have signed up to this thing. So they're going to be driving focus on getting rid of unnecessary packaging, getting it either compostable or recyclable, including recycled content. So those of you who are selling into customers, eventually they're asking you those questions, if they are your big brand owners. And it's coming, it's going to keep going. And I think part of these EPR plans the whole long-term vision of them needs to be the circular stuff. So it's the upper part of that triangle, not the lower bit. When we're thinking about those plans, it's the upper part of that triangle. So, and I don't know if anybody's seen the slide, I thought it was quite a nice image, but it kind of shows, what happens to materials at the end of life. Where can they go? They can go into lots of different things. throw it on a landfill. No. I don't think this one actually has litter, because we do that really well here. There's landfill, there's incineration. You can put it into fuels. You put it into all kinds of other things. A lot of what we do in South Africa is the mechanical recycling component. We've got a thriving mechanical recycling sector in South Africa. I think it's only set to grow. One of the things when we talk about circular economy, though, is a lot of people say, chemical recycling. We've got to go right back to basically taking the waste and take it all the way back to depolymerization, take it back to the monomers that made up the plastic in the first place, and then we can start again, because that's the gold standard from a circular point of view. But it's not necessarily the truth. And again, I think one of these things, the reason I want to put this up is not so much it is about that, but it's also about there will always be two sides to every story. So you hear of a wonderful solution, there's going to be a downside. So when you're looking at solutions for your packaging, make sure you look at all the options. Make sure you look at the pros and the cons. But on a chemical recycling point of view, look at the greenhouse gas emission component of that. It's significant. So, and Annabie's the one who can explain to you how it happens. Rob, my husband's explained it to me many times, but it goes straight over. I'm an economist, not a scientist. But it actually it can potentially have a worse effect on the environment than going to landfill, where it's locked up. Also, there's so little infrastructure, and building that infrastructure is hugely expensive. So what we would end up having to do in South Africa is actually shipping that waste overseas to be processed. That just seems dwarf to me. Why would we want to be doing that? So then this slide kind of just talks about, the concept of recycling actually spans so many different aspects. It can go anything from, you guys would have heard this, the bottle-to-bottle recycling that has been done and is being done in South Africa. That is your ultimate, where something, it starts as something and it goes back to the same thing it was before. Very difficult to do that with many products because A, it loses integrity, but B, PET is the only polymer that you can do that from a food grade point of view. So all the others, you can't do that in a food grade system, and a lot of our packaging is food. So a little bit more challenging, but we mustn't stop looking at that. Then, we can look at other things, and I was trying to be a bit diplomatic. I was looking for icons that kind of show different things without offending anybody. But we do take, in South Africa, we do take a lot of our materials, our recycling materials, and put them into things like irrigation pipe. You can imagine the kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of irrigation pipe in this country. So that was all made out of virgin plastic. That would be nuts. So it's a great space to use our recycled content. There are many other applications like that. Geotextiles, there's lots and lots of different things in that space. I think this interesting one, we've had a big Barney about it actually, and I particularly wanted to pick it up, is around the thermoform thing. So ZZ2, I don't know who's from ZZ2, I'm just picking on you. Your thermoform cherry tomatoes that, packaged in those like clamshell things. Currently not recycled, currently not collected. Theoretically, that stuff can be turned back into a tray. Theoretically, because it's PET. Most of it's PET. It could be turned back because it's PET and go back into food grade. But the technology doesn't exist anywhere really in the world to do it on scale. It's only just starting to get traction. There's a whole lot of considerations around it. So, as a thermoform sector, there's a choice that needs to be made. Either you go, we don't recycle it, we don't collect it, until we can do the circular solution, or we take it on now, we process it, and we turn it into fiber. So polyester fiber, that is what the stuff can go into. There's a market already for industrial fibers, going into cars, the carpets, you keep talking about cars, going into carpets, those kinds of things. Again, it's not ideal because it's not truly circular, but what it is doing is it is taking out virgin material from those particular fabrics. If you were to use virgin polyester to go into those carpets, rather use recycled. And one of the things that I forgot to mention during the, when I was talking about what the legislation requires, One of the things that it actually calls for is life cycle impact assessments, LCAs. I'm sure you've all heard of an LCA. It says you actually need to start doing LCAs. Now, LCAs are very expensive because they require a lot of information. But what they can do, and I know that there's some work that's being done already on, and work that has been done previously on milk packaging, and the life cycle impact of different decisions that you can make. What is the best decision? And you've got to think about that entire system when you're making these calls as to what your products actually end up going into. You've got to look at weigh up all the pros and cons. And LCAs are not just about carbon footprint. It's water footprint, it's biodiversity, there's a myriad of things you've got to think about when you make these decisions. So choosing something for your product to go into at the end of the day is not necessarily as easy as, oh, there's something over there, I'll shove it in there and walk away. The legislation is going to hold you to account. There's also, and I think Annabi started talking about it, you showed a couple of pictures, Annabi, about alternatives that aren't necessarily your traditional, we think about plastic into irrigation piping or into toughy black bags or whatever, those things that we all traditionally associate with recycling. There's all kinds of new things, some new things, and you talked about the picnic tables. Those are fantastic. I've got one, and to try and actually find somebody who supplied one was quite a job. It was quite interesting. I wanted a second-hand one so that I could have like double benefit, but nobody wanted to sell me one. But at least that I know has locked up a lot of plastic. But it's not it's not a particularly aesthetic product, but it is locking up a lot of waste. But there are other people who have built, there's a company called Infinite Industries in Boxburg. I don't know if anybody knows them. They've done some fantastic, Google them. They're my new favorites, I love them. They've done some fantastic work with the difficult to recycle materials, turning it into really innovative sheeting of different sorts, anything from decorative panels to roofing. And to go back to Yaku's point, they've developed roof sheeting using recycled material that is literally, from an insulation point of view, improves insulation compared to a zinc roof by something like 10 degrees each way. Now, that from a cooling, heating, human health perspective, wow. You can use it for prefab housing. They're using it for toilets, prefab toilets, all of that kind of stuff. Lots and lots of application for that. And I think the more we start getting these materials back out of the system, the more of those innovative things are going to come up. And then we can start using, and I think it's really important to say, when you're choosing something to put your recycled material into, think about, it's not just trying to get rid of it. Think about what value it can add as a material. So that's why that roofing is so great. It has an insulation property. There is a new thing, some of you may have heard about it, called Resonate. It's produced by a company called CRDC. Has its pros and its cons, and this is a great one for saying, is this a good idea or isn't it? I'm kind of still on the fence on it, because it's an aggregate for concrete. So it goes into molded concrete products, it replaces the fine aggregate, the sand, and it's made from 100% recycled plastic. Not sure though what happens with it long term in terms of microplastic leakage. If that thing breaks down, where does it go? Unfortunately, it has to use things like HDPE to make it work. We know that HDPE has a really, really good value for it in far higher, so milk bottles, I know we talked about milk bottles. Milk bottle recyclate can go into a handy Andy bottle, can go into an organics shampoo bottle. Far rather that, personally, than going into a brick. But maybe because we have so much volume, we have to think about that as part of the solution in the interim. But what you don't want to be doing is building systems that supply these things to such a point that that becomes the norm, and you're just feeding them the animal that wants the lower value stuff, rather than migrating it up that value curve. So I've said a lot, and I'm throwing in a huge amount here. I'm not going to be, I get really passionate, so I'll be here for a month of Sundays. But I think the key point here is, there's a lot of, shit out there that we're going to have to get back and we're going to have to do something with. We're going to have to work together to do it. We're going to have to find solutions, and some of those solutions are not going to be circular in the early stages, unfortunately, but we want to make sure that we're designing for circularity in the long term. So I think just to, and again, Annabi, you talked a bit about this, but we need to get this stuff out. Great if we've got it and we can create a whole new sector of recycling and new products and all kinds of things, but how do we get it out? We're a complex system in South Africa. It's not as simple as putting it in a bag and walk off. It doesn't work like that. We don't even put it in the bag. We just put it in the weedy bin. So we've got to think about all of these different role players. How do we involve them? How do we incorporate them? How do we not kick out the informal collectors at the expense, for the formal sector to thrive? The amount, as Annabi said, of waste getting picked off landfill is substantial. And Cape Town's the only place that landfill picking is not allowed. But really we've got to think about that and know that in South Africa, waste collection is driven by economics. How much you pick up is what you get paid for. So we've got to keep that thing in mind. And I'm going to throw in one more anecdote in what I do. So you asked who has a collection service that comes and collects your recycling. I purposefully don't. There are a lot of my neighbours who do, because I've seen the orange bags. I don't know why they're orange this at the moment, but they're orange. I purposefully separate my recyclables out. I leave them on the pavement for the picker. I speak to him regularly and say, what are you buying? What are you getting? What's valuable to you? What's weighty? So that he can actually get that. My lightweight stuff, sorry, I take to a waste management company so that they can deal with that. But at least, even though it's free, I don't have to do that for the moment while those guys are there. So there's a solution if you do have formal collection of waste to still separate out. It's also not have to put it in your car and drive it somewhere else, because there will be pickers picking it up and you're actually supporting them. And encourage your neighbours to do that. So I think just my second last slide, this is really just talking about, you don't have to read all the detail, but say, to develop, coming back full circle, developing a robust EPR plan in line with the legislation requires a lot of information. It requires a lot of engagement and knowing what is actually happening out there before you can even decide what to do with it. So you better, and one of the things that it's going to require is companies to start collecting information that they never collected before. Remember way back when, I'm sure all of you do carbon footprints? Remember when we only captured electricity bills for the rand value, or water bills for the rand value? Now we capture kilowatt hours and kiloliters. Same thing on packaging. You have to start collecting tons, polymer types, all of those things, just to enable you to report against a legislated requirement. Okay, and I think the last thing there is really just around, I hope I've made it clear that it's a complex space. It's not going to be an easy thing to resolve. If you try and do it on your own, or you try and do it competitively, you're not going to get it right. And we just try and do it as a tick box. Then government's going to take it back. So let's not let them do that. Let's commit to this properly, let's do it properly, and let's collaborate on making it happen. So I think what do you need to be doing, and I think this is as organizations, make sure that you are part of a scheme. It's probably too late, but at least make sure you start speaking. You know who you need to start speaking to. Make sure you've got the data, start building the systems. The guys that are at the edge of the curve have been building those systems for 3 years already because they knew this was coming. It takes that long. So you need to start making sure you're getting that data. And I think really important, figure out where you have influence in the value chain, because that's important. So if you're the organization that decides what your tomatoes go into, then you know where your influence is. You're not going to tell a packaging manufacturer how to manufacture packaging, but you starting to think about the design of what your packaging needs to look like, what it needs to do for you, and engage and work with your converters to do that. And very importantly, other partners. Who else do you need on this journey? So it's not just you, Stockseer Lillian, it's not just you and your packaging manufacturer. Who else needs to be part of this conversation? And I think the last message is, you can't just outsource your legislated responsibility to a PRO and pray. And I wasn't paid by any of the PROs to say that. So I think that's me. Thank you. got 1 minute to answer the question. Sorry, I can talk a lot. So, who is responsible for supplying reports on measurement of the same product supplied from converter to the packaging decision maker? So, I think this is where the definition of producer becomes complicated. Because who is the producer? Essentially, the local converters, and again, it depends which PRO you sign up with. They have different methodologies. Some say it's the converters who say, this is how much gets put on the market, we put this much on the market, and these are our customers that we're servicing. And so long as those customers are members of the PRO, it's okay. If you import, if you're the importer, then you need to obviously say, you need to record it. But essentially, you need to have that data available so that if a PRO comes in, or, because one of the big strict regulation components is auditing. You need to be able to go back and audit and see what has actually happened. So best you have your data on hand. So you may not have to necessarily report it directly, depending on the PRO you join or the system you join, but you need that data. And then, can a food warehouse apply to be a PRO on behalf of its suppliers? So, remember, first of all, a PRO needs to be a not-for-profit company, okay? So that is one thing. I don't know if a food warehouse would want to be a non-for-profit company, and it has a lot of things on its behalf. I guess theoretically, you could set one up. Why the hell you want to do that? I don't know, but Annabelle, do you have any idea?
Yeah, would that be like a Cape fruit, for example? I mean, is that, and now all the farmers supplying becomes the implemented?
Is that what you, yeah, Vusi, I don't know who Vusi is.
Yeah, distribution warehouse.
But
Sports distribution warehouse.
So, but a DC on behalf, so what kind of organization are you talking about though? So, because you get retail distribution centers? Or
yeah, a retail distribution center. Well, so in our space, okay, so you have the equipment center on the one side that is a profitable warehouse. It's not a cost center. And then on the other hand, you also have a foods distribution that is a cost center. So from a profit center point of view, where we interact with lots and lots of suppliers that we, in terms of the equipment and stuff, would you consider looking at the profitability of that equipment center and being a PRO?
I think the easiest is going to be for you to say, I'll capture the information and I'll pass that on to the PRO.
yes.
So where you say, I've taken so much shrink wrap, so much pallets, so much crates, so much cardboard boxes, and you report on their behalf. But to actually do all that accountability around the PRO side, the auditing, it's madness.
Yeah, because it means you have to engage with informal collectors. There's a huge amount of, where if you just read the requirements of a PRO, I think it probably wouldn't make sense for you to do that, but as Annabelle says, I think to be an aggregator of information, that could potentially make sense, and that could be a service that you offer to your customers, your suppliers. Happy to take that conversation offline if you'd like to. It's an interesting debate. What is the role of municipalities in the implementation of EPR? So, yeah, Eddie. So I think in terms of the municipalities play a critical role in terms of the service support that is required to enable EPR. So in my understanding of the space would be municipalities provide everything from, it's not just the waste collection capability, it would also be how do they provide support to informal collectors in terms of land availability, services for, sorting waste, those kinds of things. So I think it's across the full value chain. What role does the municipality play in terms of communicating to consumers, your households? You're touching every household, hopefully every household, most households in the city. You would need to be able to communicate. I would see municipalities being a key channel for communication, for separation at source, changing behaviour. So I think it's across all of them that municipalities play a role, but it's going to be complex because it's in so many different departments within a municipality. So it's not just the infrastructure side. I don't know if that answers your question. Makes you want to run away. Okay, I think that's it from me. Thank you very much.